My father cried in front of me for the first time. I'll never look at him the same. My father was always the big guy walking into every room. His massive figure would always intimidate everyone, but once you got to know him, he was really a sweetheart on the inside. One thing about him that never changed was his stoicism. Not once did this man cry or show any emotion, until the day that changed everything. It had been 7 years since my mother passed away from a burglary attempt on my house. After she had passed, my father was never quite the same. This didn't help the stoicism, but only added on to it. Any tiny bit of emotion that he used to let out was completely and utterly gone. It seemed to be that he was bottling all of his emotions up about the situation, and I was right, but not in the way I thought. I was chilling on the couch watching a movie, when I heard a huge sob. One of those sobs that you just can't control. At first, I didn't know who it could be. It was only me and my dad at the house during that time, and I knew my dad didn't show emotion, so I was really spooked out by it. Then I realized it was coming from my father's room. When I entered, I saw him at the end of the bed with his face buried in his hands, tears flowing through them. I was in utter shock. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat next to him, putting my hand on his back. He immediately leaned in for a hug, which I accepted. After hugging him for about 10 to 20 minutes with no conversation, I asked him, "What's wrong, Dad? I've never seen you be like this." He looked up into my eyes, and said, "I did it." Confused, I asked him what that meant. He then proceeded to say that exact same thing 10 times in a row. "I did it, I did it." I questioned him further. "What did you do, Dad? You're starting to scare me." What he said next will be etched into my memory for the rest of my life. "I killed your mother." I was in shock. Did I hear what he had just said right? He then went on this big spew of words trying to explain the whole situation, but I was still in shock. I just sat there staring at him with my mouth wide open. After about a minute of spewing, he started to realize that I wasn't even paying attention to him. He changed tones real quick, looked at me and said, "How'd you like that? I was working on my acting skills and thought I would test it out on you." My dad has never acted in his life, so these words surprised me. "You've never acted, Dad? What the hell are you talking about?" At this point I was incredibly angry. If he really was acting, why about Mom, and how did he cry and sob so real-like? "Well, I didn't mean to shock you like that, but I'm trying out as an extra for a movie soon and thought this would train me a bit." He then proceeded to tell me all about this show as I sat there still angrier than ever. He slowly calmed me down though, and after 45 minutes of talking after that I went back to watching my movie. I knew something wasn't quite right. There was no way my father, the stoic man he was going to try acting in a movie. 2 months go by, and with this strange event still at the forefront of mind, I asked him how his audition went with the movie. Here is where he fucked up. He was reading the paper when I asked him, and subconsciously replied with, "What movie?" This is when I realized he had been bullshitting. He caught himself a second after and said, "Oh, yeah, it didn't really work out, guess they didn't like me." His acting seemed real when he was talking to me, so that wasn't true either. It was at this moment that I knew my dad had been telling the truth about murdering my mom. I didn't tell him at the moment, but I was going to call the cops and share my suspicions. Well, I did just that and told them that they should look into it. The cops had the nerve to tell me that without probable cause, they couldn't reopen the case, and that my testimony wasn't enough to suffice that. I was livid. I knew he was lying, but I didn't know how to prove it. Well, what I did next might not be morally right, but it worked. I decided to have my friend from college who was very built dress up as a cop and try to talk to my dad. We came up with this elaborate plan about how my friend would act as if they were reopening the case, and that he needed to ask my dad a few questions about it. We put a secret camera on him so that we could record the whole thing, if we got any incriminating evidence. My friend did just that, and the video is as described. They were sitting at the dining room table with my father in frame. My friend asked, "Your son has said that there was a weird incident around 2 months ago where you allegedly confessed that you killed your wife?" He replied, "Ah yes, I'm not sure why he would contact you about that because I told him that I was trying out for a movie, and that I was just acting." My friend then asks, "What movie was it?" He sat there for a long while, trying to think of what to say, but we had stumped him. On top of that, we had got it all on camera. This was enough for probable cause, and we ran straight to the police with this footage. While they didn't agree with our way of getting it, they did admit that it was suspicious, and decided to reopen the case. After 7 years of getting away with it, my father was arrested a month later on charges of first-degree murder of my mother. It was a sad reality that hit me for a while. I thought our family was perfect, and that my mother's passing was just an unfortunate turn of events, but my father must have had other thoughts. He was convicted for life. Turns out he had staged the burglary attempt and somehow gotten away with a fake alibi at the time of my mother's original case. I never got the chance to ask why he did what he did, but I never looked at him the same the day that he cried in front of me. How did the love of your life almost get away? My friends dragged me along to the concert. They said I had been miserable and unbearable since breaking up with my girlfriend. I did not particularly like being around these friends at this moment in time as they were a couple, and I did not like being a third wheel just 2 weeks after getting dumped. It was the gig of an indie band, and the crowd was around 100 people. Barry told me to turn my frown upside down and Julie got us beers. We stood near the back and drank our beers. The band was okay, but nothing special. Barry and Julie talked about the venue and the band. They kept trying to drag me into conversation, but I wasn't feeling very talkative. I missed my ex-girlfriend and just wanted to sulk. I excused myself and headed towards the bathroom. On the way back, a girl suddenly turned and spilled her beer over my shirt. She apologized multiple times, pulled her sleeve over her hand and started wiping my chest with a tissue she pulled from her bag. I told her it was okay and that I didn't really like the shirt anyway. I said my ex-girlfriend had got it for me and she laughed. This girl was attractive in a way that I cannot exactly pinpoint, in a way completely different to how I found my ex-girlfriend attractive. Her name was Sarah. She said her friends had dragged her along to the gig. We agreed the band was nothing special and then started talking about life. She worked as a cashier in a clothes store and lived in the next town over. I told her I worked in a shoe store but painted in my spare time. She asked if I would like to paint her and winked. My cheeks started burning. The conversation continued and it turned out we had similar taste in music and television. We also both liked camping and running in marathons. At the other side of the venue, I saw Barry and Julie teasing me by mimicking bedroom activities. The girl said she had to get back to her friends and my heart sank a little. It rose again when she asked if I wanted to take her number. I told her I think she already knew the answer and handed over my phone. Sarah put her number into my phone, said she looked forward to hearing from me and strutted back over to her friends who were all sizing me up with mischievous facial expressions. When I got back to Barry and Julie, they smugly asked if I was now glad I had listened to them and attended the concert. After the concert, we got food at KFC and then I went back to my apartment. I sat on my bed and decided to send Julie a text reiterating how great it had been to meet her. A part of me thought this was far too soon to text and worried I would freak her out, but I already missed talking to her and wanted to keep things moving between us as quickly as possible. However, as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized I could not find her number. I looked through my contacts again and still could not see the number. I realized she must have forgotten to hit save while entering her number and I had been stupid enough not to double check at the moment. Before falling asleep that night, I blinked back tears and cursed myself for being such an idiot. The following morning, I decided I could not let a technological screw-up keep me away from this girl. I tried looking her up online based on what I knew about her from the conversation. The social media produced nothing, and then I remembered Sarah had casually mentioned during our conversation that she tried to stay away from social media for the sake of her mental health. I shut my laptop, grabbed my coat and left my apartment. I got the bus into all the neighboring towns and checked out every single clothes store. 12 in total. I asked staff members in every store if they had any coworkers called Sarah. I contacted the gig venue, asked if she had bought her ticket online and if they could share her contact information with me. They said no with a slightly concerned tone and abruptly ended the call. Deflated, I returned home and tried to figure out my next move. Barry called me over a few nights later. He asked how things had been going with the girl, and I explained the entire situation. Barry expressed sympathy about the mess up with her phone number but discouraged me from pursuing the girl further. He said I was probably just desperate for a quick rebound and could find somebody else rather than obsessively searching for a girl I had a short conversation with at a gig. I told Barry he didn't know what he was talking about. This was more than a quick rebound. I felt a real connection with this girl. Things got a bit awkward then. Barry was the one who wasn't very talkative, and I struggled drawing him into the conversation. As he left, I said we would talk soon, and Barry just told me to look after myself. I texted Julie, stating that Barry was in a strange, unsupportive mood but she never replied. The following week, just as I got home from work, my ex-girlfriend called and asked for a meetup. We met at a diner, sat in a booth by the corner and ordered 2 coffees. Tracy, my ex, admitted she had made a mistake by ending our relationship. She asked to get back together, and although I felt a flash of hesitation due to lingering hope I held for finding Sarah, I said yes to my ex-girlfriend. We talked through some issues, the reasons for our breakup and then got back together right there in the diner. She moved her stuff back into my apartment that night. Weeks passed, and I mostly stopped thinking about Sarah. I still thought about her occasionally in passing and wondered what could have been, but the intense longing and heartbreak had stopped. The awkwardness with Barry and Julie also faded. I even had them over for dinner with me and Tracy on more than one occasion. We ate, talked and laughed like the breakup had never happened. One night as we got ready for bed, Tracy asked me if I had hooked up with anyone while we had been broken up or if I had been tempted by anybody. I knew Barry and Julie had not told her anything. They were more my friends than hers, and they would have told me if anything had slipped out about Sarah. I told Tracy I'd only thought about her during our breakup, and she seemed very pleased with my answer. I thought that would be the end of the drama in my life until I ran into Sarah at the same gig venue a few weeks later. I was getting drinks at the bar while Tracy, Barry and Julie sat at a table by the door. Sarah exited the bathroom, saw me and walked straight over. My heart started beating very fast, the same way it had on the night we met. She asked me why I had never called and I said her number had not been saved in my phone. She offered to put the number in again, and I told her I had gotten back together with my girlfriend. She looked across the bar and her eyes landed on the friends I had attended the venue with on the night we first met. She then correctly summarized that the third individual, Tracy, was my girlfriend. Sarah asked me if I was happy with Tracy, and I said I was. I apologized for the unfortunate way things had gone between us. I told her all the ways I had tried to find her after realizing the number wasn't in my phone. Sarah said she had quit the clothes store the day after we met due to its bad management and gone to work in a jewelry store. She then said my actions weren't those of somebody who was still in love with his girlfriend. She said that my actions were those of somebody who wanted to move on and had made a proper connection with somebody else. She told me to take her number again, to call her if I ever changed my mind and realized what I really wanted, so I took it. When I got back to my friends, Tracy asked me who the girl at the bar was and I told her she was a customer who I served at work earlier in the day. Back at our apartment, I sat down in my office, took out my materials and started painting. I did not have any specific vision in mind when I started. I was just putting colors on the palette. As I added pink to the random collage of colors, Tracy walked into the office. She put her hands on my shoulders and said I should really consider giving up painting. She said I was never going to make any money from it. She also said she needed to be honest with me and said I just wasn't very good. I told my girlfriend she was probably right, dumped my progress and put my materials away. I acted like everything was fine, even though on the inside I was undergoing a significant emotional transformation. I was starting to realize that Sarah was right. The following morning, after a sleepless night, I went out on my balcony and called Sarah. I told her that I needed to see her. That was 5 years ago, and we've been together ever since. I thought I had lost my best friend. Turns out she faked her death to get with my husband. I had lost everything when I lost Renee. We had met as children at only 5 years old. We have had over 2 decades together, through thick and thin. She gave the most wonderful speech at my wedding. I was an only child, but Renee is my sister in the truest sense. When I got the news of the accident, I was inconsolable, just totally beside myself. Until I realized the truth. I'm not sure if knowing she was gone forever is worse than knowing what I know now about her. Losing her meant losing everything, but after everything we've been through now, it feels like half of my life is a lie. As kids, we joked around a lot. We especially enjoyed playing pranks. Not only on each other but on everyone we knew. Our parents hated them, but we were just having fun. Over time I grew accustomed to her antics, and I could smell a fresh prank brewing from a mile away, especially if I was the target. There are certain holes in things. Missing puzzle pieces. People think that lies are added information you can look at and understand. But lies and pranks are about what is missing from the picture. In the empty space, I could form a picture of Renee and what she intended. Once, at theater camp, she had faked being sick so she could sneak away. She was supposed to be in her cabin with the flu while she was actually out moving furniture around in the faculty cabin. I only called her out because there were no tissues on her bedside table. She had medicine, but none of it was taken. Missing puzzle pieces. A month after her passing, I found the first missing piece. I was helping her mother clean out and sort old keepsakes. We were both trying to move on and hoped putting things away would help. We had some wine, opened up a few boxes, and began to conclude Renee's life by remembering her. I sobered up immediately when I saw it. Her calendar. It was a monthly whiteboard. The plans from the month of her passing were still marked in black dry erase. Except, the few weeks before her passing were completely empty. You have to understand that Renee is a busy woman. She was not one to leave a single weekend unadorned with visits to friends or family. She marked her previous weeks nearly full, and then nothing. It was just the kind of Renee-shaped hole I knew from so many years together. But this wasn't a prank. She'd never do something so hurtful. Our pranks were silly and fun, and not a tear was ever shed. I stared at the calendar and said nothing to her mother. I took a mental note of the last few appointments to try and find a pattern. I must have looked rather grim, but I passed it off as grief. The only thing I felt was suspicion. Renee had made 3 visits somewhat regularly. Dry cleaners, movie night, and trips to the grocery store. I looked at showtimes for past films and they seemed to coincide with movies I knew she had seen. I was even with her for one of them. Trips to the grocery store were harder to verify. I had to convince some poor kid working the night shift that I had something stolen from my car. I asked to take a look at the security footage, and while he helped someone else, I quickly scanned for Renee at the time she had listed on her calendar. Sure enough, I was able to find her. Always at night, and always buying a great many things. I couldn't tell anything specific from the footage, but her cart was always full when she left. This wasn't strange on its own, but she took home a full cart 3 times a week for her small apartment. Then, nothing. I drove straight to the laundromat with more questions than answers. I called my husband along the way. It seemed from the way he spoke that he was worried about me. Who could blame me for losing my head after losing Renee? He told me to call off the search for more, to just come home and deal with my loss. I reassured him that I would, just after checking on Renee's last whereabouts. There was really only one laundromat in town. I knew Renee had mentioned them before. I explained a version of my situation, trying to hunt down anything related to the last week of my best friend. The manager pulled up their digital records and explained Renee had not been there for months. I thanked them and left rather disheartened. I felt that maybe this was all nothing, and I really was losing it. I drove home to the arms of my loving husband, Michael. He could tell I was rather distraught, and I told him about the groceries and the laundromat and just how the missing chunks of Renee were adding up. He grew silent, and at the time I thought he was just really worried for me. He told me I was looking into things too closely, and I was hurting myself with grief. He said I needed a little time away, and suggested a little vacation, a weekend away with him to process my thoughts. It admittedly sounded a lot better than how I felt at that moment, and I agreed. We started packing our bags that evening, planning to leave the moment Michael returned from work. I was working from home at the time, and my duties were easy enough. I tried to focus on work that day, but the missing pieces were eating at me. I tried to occupy myself by updating my own calendar, wondering if I suddenly disappeared who might look over my recent tasks. I wasn't as dutiful in scheduling as Renee, but I had always noted items for work for both myself and my husband. I checked some recent milestones off my list, and I noticed Michael had some work projects he was busy with. I was hoping for his sake that he'd have enough time to finish his projects before our vacation. He was always working late hours, but he could usually plan those late nights in advance. Tonight was supposed to be a late night project again, some tech administration thing I didn't care to grasp. But then I was able to connect something together. There in my schedule were all the late nights my husband completed in the past few months, and the ones from last month all coincided with Renee's trips to the laundromat. I called Michael. Over and over I called and he did not answer. My mind was in such a panic that I felt drunk. I paced our house, phone ringing again and again before his voicemail took over. I thought back on how Michael was acting in those days and I wasn't sure if I was projecting, but I could sense just the whisper of one of Renee's schemes again. Missing pieces finally coming together. Then I noticed something else was missing. My husband's things that he had packed. All his luggage was gone from the neat pile we'd arranged the night before. I tore open drawers and cabinets to find he'd also taken his passport and laptop. I was hyperventilating as I again looked at my phone, over 80 outgoing unanswered calls to Michael. It was starting to get dark outside. I navigated to my Find My Phone app and logged out. I knew a good deal of Michael's passwords and soon I was able to log into his account with his credentials. I activated the GPS function and saw he was on the outskirts of town. Or, at least his phone was. Hurrying to my car, I placed the phone in the cradle and sped into the night towards the small GPS ping at the edge of town, near the highway. I screamed and cried as I went, and for the first time, I wished that Renee had just stayed dead. As I turned the corner of a grove of trees into an industrial parking lot, I saw them. My husband was holding my completely alive best friend by the hips. They were smiling, at least until my headlights stopped directly on them and the pickup truck they were standing by. They both seemed to recognize my car and panic, quickly moving to the cab of the truck and driving out of the parking lot. I mumbled the license plate to myself in shock as I called the police. The last I ever saw of them was the piles of grocery bags stacked and tied down in the back of the truck. Police found them near the border, with enough supplies to start a new life. Over the next few weeks, it was my turn to ignore their calls. Renee had been taken in for insurance fraud, and the man I thought I loved had been her accomplice. I missed all the pieces, but I finally put them all together.